Chapter 1. The Drought. 1875. The Texas Panhandle was experiencing the worst drought in living memory. The year before, cattle prices had collapsed. The year before that, a harsh winter had killed thousands of head of livestock across the region. By 1875, ranchers were facing financial ruin. The Blackthorn Ranch, located 20 miles northeast of Amarillo, was no exception. The ranch had been established in 1862 by a man named Jeremiah Blackthorn. For 13 years, it had been one of the most successful cattle operations in Randall County. Thousands of head of cattle, hundreds of acres of grazing land, a thriving business. But by 1875, the ranch was dying. Jeremiah Blackthorn was a man in his mid-50s. He had a wife, Margaret, and 3 children, Thomas, age 22, Sarah, age 19, and James, aged 14. The family had built their lives around the Blackthorn Ranch. Everything they had, everything they were, was tied to the success of that land. But the land was failing them. The wells were running dry, the grass had turned brown and brittle, the cattle were starving, and Jeremiah Blackthorn was running out of options. He had borrowed money from banks in Amarillo. He had borrowed money from other ranchers. He had sold off portions of his land to pay debts, but nothing was enough. By the spring of 1876, Jeremiah Blackthorn was facing complete financial collapse. He would lose the ranch. He would lose everything. His family would be left with nothing. One evening, as Jeremiah sat on the porch of the main house, watching the sun set over the barren landscape, he made a decision that would change everything, a decision that would doom his entire family. He decided to make a deal. Jeremiah had heard stories. Old stories that the Mexican vaqueros who worked on ranches throughout Texas whispered about when they thought no one was listening. Stories about entities that lived in the desert, spirits that could be bargained with, demons that could be summoned. Most people dismissed these stories as superstition, the ravings of ignorant, uneducated workers. But Jeremiah Blackthorn was desperate, and desperate men believe in desperate things. He sought out an old Mexican woman named Consuela Morales, who lived on the outskirts of Amarillo. She was known to practice brujeria, witchcraft. She was known to have connections to the supernatural world. She was known to make deals. Jeremiah went to her in secret. He told her his situation. He told her he would do anything to save his ranch, anything. He would give anything. And Consuela Morales smiled. She told him there was a way. There was always a way. But the price would be high. The price would be more than money. The price would be his soul. And possibly more.
Chapter 2. The Bargain. Consuela Morales performed a ritual for Jeremiah Blackthorn, a ritual designed to summon an entity known as El Diablo del Polvo, the Dust Devil, an ancient demon that existed in the spaces between the earth and sky. A creature that fed on desperation and greed. A being that could grant wishes, but only at a terrible cost. The ritual took place on a moonless night in a small adobe structure outside Amarillo. Consuela drew symbols on the ground in blood. She refused to say whose blood. She chanted in a language that Jeremiah didn't recognize. She burned herbs that smelled of sulfur and decay. And then something happened. The temperature in the room dropped so suddenly that Jeremiah could see his breath. The candles flickered and nearly went out, and a voice spoke. A voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. A voice that sounded like wind through a canyon. A voice that was ancient and hungry and utterly inhuman. The voice asked Jeremiah what he wanted. Jeremiah said he wanted his ranch to prosper. He wanted the drought to end. He wanted his cattle to thrive. He wanted his family to be secure. He wanted to be wealthy and respected and successful. The voice laughed. It was a sound like bones rattling in a coffin. And then the voice told Jeremiah the price. The price was this. The dust devil would end the drought. The dust devil would bless the Blackthorn Ranch with abundance. The cattle would multiply, the grass would grow, the wells would flow with water. For 7 years, the ranch would be the most prosperous in all of Texas. But at the end of those 7 years, the dust devil would come to collect his payment, and the payment would be the Blackthorn family itself. All of them. Every member of the family would belong to the dust devil. They would be taken into the desert. They would become part of the demon. They would cease to exist in any form that could be recognized as human. Jeremiah hesitated. He asked if there was another way, if there was a way to break the contract, if there was a way to escape the demon's claim. The voice said there was one way. If at any point during the 7 years Jeremiah could convince the dust devil to release him from the contract, the demon would do so. But the dust devil had never been convinced. Not in thousands of years of making deals. Not once. Jeremiah asked what he would have to do to convince the demon. The voice said, "You would have to give me something I want more than your family, something I want more than your souls, something I want more than your very existence." "What could that possibly be?" Jeremiah asked. The voice said, "I don't know. That's what makes it interesting." And then before Jeremiah could respond, Consuela Morales grabbed his hand and pricked his finger with a needle. She took his blood and mixed it with the symbols on the ground. She spoke a final incantation, and the deal was made. Jeremiah left Consuela's adobe that night feeling strange, exhilarated and terrified in equal measure. He had made a deal with a demon. He had sold his family's souls for 7 years of prosperity. But as he rode back to the ranch, he told himself it would be worth it. 7 years was a long time. 7 years was enough time to figure out a way to break the contract. 7 years was enough time to find a loophole. 7 years was enough time to save his family. He was wrong.
Chapter 3. The Blessing. The drought ended the very next day. Clouds rolled in from the west.
Rain fell for 3 days straight. The wells that had been dry for months suddenly overflowed with fresh water. The grass that had been brown and brittle turned green almost overnight. The cattle that had been starving began to gain weight. It was as if God Himself had decided to bless the Blackthorn Ranch. Word spread quickly through Randall County. Ranchers came to see the miracle for themselves. They saw the lush grass. They saw the healthy cattle. They saw the abundant water. They couldn't explain it. The drought was still affecting every other ranch in the region. But the Blackthorn Ranch had been spared. The Blackthorn Ranch was thriving. Jeremiah Blackthorn became wealthy beyond his wildest dreams. His cattle multiplied. His land became the most productive in Texas. Buyers came from across the state to purchase his livestock. He built a new house. He bought new equipment. He expanded his operations. His family lived in comfort and luxury. His wife, Margaret, had servants. His children had fine clothes and education. The Blackthorn name became synonymous with success and prosperity. But there was something wrong. Jeremiah noticed it first. Small things at first. A calf born with too many legs. A horse that refused to enter the barn. A dog that would only howl at certain times of day. Strange occurrences. Unnatural occurrences. And then the workers began to report strange things. They said they heard voices in the wind. They said they saw shapes moving in the dust storms. They said they felt watched. They said they felt hunted. Jeremiah dismissed these reports as superstition. The workers were just nervous. They were just imagining things. But deep down, Jeremiah knew the truth. The dust devil was watching. The dust devil was waiting. The dust devil was counting down the days until the 7-year contract expired. And as the years passed, as 1877 became 1878, became 1879, Jeremiah became increasingly obsessed with finding a way to break the contract. He spent hours in his study, reading books about demonology and occult practices. He consulted with priests and shamans. He sought out other practitioners of the dark arts. But no one could help him. No one knew how to break a contract with a demon. No one had ever successfully done it. By 1882, as the 7th year of the contract approached, Jeremiah was desperate. He was willing to do anything. He was willing to sacrifice anything. He was willing to give anything. Anything except his family.
Chapter 4. The Final Year. In the spring of 1883, as the 7th year of the contract neared its end, strange things began to happen at the Blackthorn Ranch. The dust storms became more frequent, more intense, more violent. They would appear suddenly, without warning, and disappear just as quickly. And in the center of each storm, witnesses reported seeing a shape, a vaguely humanoid shape, a figure made of dust and wind and something else, something that shouldn't exist. The workers began to disappear. One by one, they would venture out into the dust storms and never return. Their bodies were never found. It was as if the storms were consuming them, taking them into the desert and erasing all trace of their existence. Jeremiah's son, Thomas, began to act strangely. He would stand at the edge of the property, facing the desert for hours at a time. He would speak in a voice that wasn't his own. He would say things that made no sense. He would describe visions of a vast, empty space, a place of wind and dust and eternal hunger. Jeremiah's daughter, Sarah, began to waste away. She stopped eating. She stopped sleeping. She would lie in her bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to voices that only she could hear. She would whisper responses to these voices. She would beg them to stop. She would beg them to take her. And Jeremiah's youngest son, James, simply vanished. One day he was there. The next day he was gone. Jeremiah searched the entire ranch. He searched the surrounding desert. He found nothing. James had been taken. Margaret, Jeremiah's wife, begged him to tell her what was happening. She demanded to know the truth. And finally, broken and desperate, Jeremiah told her everything. He told her about the deal. He told her about the dust devil. He told her that the contract was expiring. He told her that the demon was coming to collect. Margaret was horrified. She wanted to flee. She wanted to take the children and leave the ranch immediately. She wanted to escape to Amarillo, to Fort Worth, to anywhere that was far away from the cursed land. But Jeremiah refused. He said there was nowhere to run. He said the dust devil would find them no matter where they went. He said the only way to survive was to find a way to satisfy the demon's hunger, to find something the demon wanted more than their souls. And then, on the evening of June 15th, 1883, exactly 7 years after the deal was made, Jeremiah had an idea. A desperate, terrible idea. An idea that would lead to the final horror of the Blackthorn Ranch.
Chapter 5. The Collection. On the evening of June 15th, 1883, Jeremiah Blackthorn made a final, desperate decision. He decided to give the dust devil what it wanted. Not his family, but something else, something that the demon might want more. He decided to give the demon all the wealth he had accumulated, all the money, all the cattle, all the land, everything. He would strip himself of every possession. He would reduce himself to nothing. And in exchange, he would ask the dust devil to release his family from the contract. Jeremiah spent the entire night gathering every valuable thing on the ranch. He collected money from his safe. He gathered jewelry from his wife. He collected documents of property ownership. He piled it all in the center of the main house. And then, at dawn, he walked out into the desert. He walked toward the horizon, and he began to call out to the dust devil. He said, "I have something for you. I have something you might want. I'm offering you everything I have, all my wealth, all my possessions, all my property. In exchange, I ask you to release my family from our contract. I ask you to let them go." And the wind responded. The wind began to blow. It began to swirl. It began to take shape. And the dust devil appeared. It was a towering figure made entirely of dust and wind. It had no face, but somehow Jeremiah could feel its gaze upon him. It had no voice, but somehow he could hear it speaking directly into his mind. And the dust devil said, "Your wealth means nothing to me. Your possessions are dust. Your property is temporary. I don't want your things, Jeremiah Blackthorn. I want your family. I want their souls. I want to add them to my collection. I want to make them part of me forever." Jeremiah fell to his knees. He begged, he pleaded, he offered everything he could think of. But the dust devil was unmoved. And then the dust devil told Jeremiah the truth about the contract, the truth about the deal. The dust devil said, "You asked if there was a way to convince me to release you. You asked if there was something I wanted more than your family, and I told you I didn't know. But I lied, Jeremiah Blackthorn. I knew all along. There is something I want more than your family. There is something I want more than anything in this world." "What?" Jeremiah asked desperately. "What do you want? I'll give it to you. I'll do anything." The dust devil said, "I want you to understand. I want you to comprehend the full magnitude of what you've done. I want you to know that your family is already mine. They have been mine since the moment you signed the contract. They are already part of me. They are already transforming. They are already becoming something other than human." And then the dust devil showed Jeremiah the truth. Jeremiah looked back at the ranch house, and he saw his family. But they weren't human anymore. They were becoming part of the wind. Their bodies were dissolving into dust. Their souls were being absorbed into the dust devil's consciousness. They were being consumed. They were being transformed into something eternal and inhuman and utterly terrible. And Jeremiah understood. He understood that there was no escape. There was no loophole. There was no way to break the contract. The deal had been made. The price had been set. And now it was time to pay. The dust devil reached out toward Jeremiah, and Jeremiah felt himself beginning to dissolve. He felt his body turning to dust. He felt his soul being absorbed into the demon's consciousness. He was becoming part of something vast and ancient and hungry. And then everything went black.
Epilogue: The Phantom Ranch. When authorities arrived at the Blackthorn Ranch the next morning, they found nothing. No bodies, no blood, no sign of struggle.
The main house was empty. The outbuildings were empty. The entire ranch had been abandoned. But here's what's strange. The ranch didn't exist anymore. The land was there, but the structures were gone. It was as if the dust devil had erased the ranch from existence, as if it had never been built. To this day, the land where the Blackthorn Ranch stood remains empty. No one will build there. No one will live there. Because every few years, when the wind reaches a certain velocity, when the dust rises in a particular pattern, people report seeing it. The Blackthorn Ranch, exactly as it was on that final night, a phantom manifestation, a ghost of a place that made a deal with darkness. And if you listen carefully to the wind in that place, you can hear voices, voices calling out, voices begging for help, voices of Jeremiah Blackthorn and his family, trapped forever in the dust, part of the dust devil's eternal collection. Stay away from that land, because the dust devil is still hungry, and he's still looking for new souls to add to his chorus. This is Mysteries of the Old West. Thank you for joining me in this nightmare.